Under the flickering glow of Detroit streetlights, a young girl's dream-filled night was about to collide with a harsh reality she never saw coming. What happens when a single act of prejudice shatters a young girl's dreams, but ignites a journey of resilience that changes lives? In the heart of Detroit, 16-year-old Aaliyah Brooks faces a devastating injustice at the hands of a biased cop, Karen Steele. But as their paths collide from pain to redemption, they uncover the power of forgiveness and the strength to heal a community. Join us for a story that will tug at your heart and inspire your soul. Watch until the end to see how one girl's melody becomes a symphony of hope. 16-year-old Aaliyah Brooks stepped lightly down the cracked sidewalks of Midtown Detroit, her heart soaring like the notes of the violin she'd played just hours ago. The evening had been Magicaler's first solo performance at the historic Harmony Hall, a small but cherished venue where local talents blossomed. Her fingers still tingled with the memory of the bow gliding across the strings, the audience's applause echoing in her ears like a warm embrace. She wore a soft lavender dress that shimmered faintly under the streetlights, a perfect contrast to the intricate braids cascading down her back. Those braids weren't just a hairstyle. They were a labor of love, crafted by her father, Malik Brooks, that very morning. "These braids are your crown, Aaliyah," Malik had said, his voice thick with pride as he wove each strand with care. "Tonight, you're going to shine brighter than any star in the Motor City sky." His words had made her feel invincible, like a princess stepping onto her stage. As she walked, the cool April air brushed against her cheeks, but inside, she was warm, radiating with the joy of accomplishment and the love of a father who'd always been her biggest cheerleader. The city around her buzzed with its usual late-night hum-distant car horns, the faint rhythm of music spilling from a nearby bar, the rustle of leaves skittering across the pavement. Aaliyah clutched the concert program in her hand, its edges slightly worn from how tightly she held it. It was her proof, her keepsake of a night she'd never forget. She imagined showing it to her friends at school tomorrow, their gasps of amazement as she recounted every detail. But that dream, so vivid and pure, was about to shatter. A patrol car crept up behind her, its engine a low growl that sliced through the night's quiet. Red and blue lights flashed, casting jagged shadows on the damp pavement. Aaliyah's steps faltered, her heart sinking as a flicker of unease crept in. She turned her head slightly, hoping the car would pass, but it slowed to a stop, its headlights pinning her in their glare like a spotlight she didn't want. Behind the wheel sat Officer Karen Steele, a 38-year-old veteran of the Detroit Police Department. Karen had just come off a grueling double shift, her patience worn thin by exhaustion and the weight of years spent patrolling these streets. She squinted through the windshield, her gaze locking onto Aliyaha, a young black girl in a delicate dress, her braids catching the light in a way that, to Karen's prejudiced eyes, screamed suspicion. A kid like that, out here this late? That hairstyle, it's gotta be gang-related? Karen muttered to herself, her voice dripping with unfounded certainty. She'd seen too many troublemakers in her career, or so she thought, and Aaliyah fit the profile her biased instincts had built over the years. Karen stepped out of the patrol car, her boots hitting the pavement with a heavy thud that echoed in the stillness. "Stop right there," she barked, her tone sharp enough to cut through Aaliyah's lingering joy. "What are you doing out here at this hour?" Aaliyah turned, her grip tightening on the concert program, as if it could shield her from the accusation in Karen's voice. Just finished my violin recital at Harmony Hall," she replied, her voice soft but steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I live a few blocks away. I'm just walking home." Karen's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line. She didn't care about the explanation. To her, Aaliyah's calm demeanor was just another sign of defiance, a challenge to her authority. "Let me see your ID," she demanded, stepping closer, her shadow looming over the girl. Aaliyah hesitated, her stomach twisting. "May I ask why, ma'am?" "I haven't done anything wrong." Her words were polite, but they carried a quiet strength, a refusal to be intimidated. Karen's expression darkened. "Don't play games with me," she snapped, her voice icy. "That hairstyle? Don't tell me it's not gang-related. I know better." The accusation hit Aaliyah like a slap. Her braids her father's gift. Her crown were being twisted into something ugly, something criminal. She felt a lump rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down, refusing to let this stranger see her break. "My dad did my hair for me this morning," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "It's not about any gang, it's about love." Karen scoffed, unconvinced. She snatched Aaliyah's small backpack, ignoring the girl's protest. "Obstructing an investigation," she barked, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "If you don't cooperate, I'm taking you to the station." The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked around Aaliyah's wrists, each sound a dagger to her heart. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, soaking her lavender dress and blurring the ink on her concert program. As Karen led her to the patrol car, Aaliyah's steps felt heavy, her dreams of the night dissolving into a bitter memory of humiliation. She bit her lip, holding back tears, her father's words echoing in her mind, "You're a star." But under the harsh glare of those red and blue lights, Aaliyah felt like her light had been snuffed out, stolen by a system that saw her not as a girl with dreams, but as a threat to be controlled. The rain-soaked streets of Detroit held secrets far heavier than the droplets that fell that night, secrets that tied Aaliyah Brooks's shattered evening to a dangerous web stretching far beyond her quiet walk home. At 16, Aaliyah Brooks was more than just a high school junior with a knack for the violins. She was a dreamer, a girl who saw music as her bridge to a world where she could be anything. Growing up in Detroit's East Side, where the echoes of Motown still lingered in the air, Aaliyah had always found solace in the strings of her violin. Each note she played was a rebellion against the hardships she saw around her: the boarded-up storefronts, the whispered worries of neighbors about crime, the weight of a city that felt both proud and broken. But her father, Malik Brooks, had taught her to rise above it all. "You're a Brooks, Aaliyah," he'd say, his deep voice steady as he adjusted her bow hold. "We don't just survive, you shine." Those words were her anchor, especially on nights like the one at Harmony Hall, where she'd poured her heart into every note, her braids swaying with each passionate stroke of her bow. Malik, a 42-year-old FBI agent, was the rock of Aaliyah's world, but he carried a burden she could only glimpse in the tired lines around his eyes. For the past 3 years, Malik had been deep undercover, infiltrating the network of Victor Kane, a notorious crime lord whose empire of drugs, arms, and human trafficking cast a long shadow over Detroit. Malik's mission was a tightrope walk home. Wrong step could cost him his life. Or worse, the lives of his family. He'd spent countless nights away from home, trading his role as a doting father for the guise of a loyal enforcer in Kane's crew. But every morning he was home, he'd make time for Aaliyah, braiding her hair with a tenderness that belied the danger he faced. Those braids weren't just a hairstyle, they were a silent promise. "I'm still here for you, no matter what." That night, as Aaliyah sat in the cold holding cell at the precinct, her lavender dress clinging to her skin and her concert program a soggy mess on the floor, she clung to that promise. The sting of Officer Karen Steele's actions burned deeper. Braids, her father's gift, had been reduced to a symbol of suspicion in Karen's eyes. Aaliyah's chest tightened with a mix of anger and hurt, but she refused to let the tears fall. She thought of her father's words, his pride in her strength, and held her head high, even as the fluorescent lights above buzzed with a harsh, unfeeling glare. Karen Steele, on the other hand, was a product of a different kind of conditioning. At 38, she'd spent nearly 2 decades on the force, her early years shaped by the gritty realities of Detroit's streets and the jaded lessons of older cops. "Always watch the kids with wild hair," one of her first partners had told her, his tone casual but laced with prejudice. "They're usually up to no good." Those words had burrowed into Karen's mind, festering over the years into a lens through which she saw the world. She prided herself on her instincts, but those instincts were tainted, built on stereotypes that turned a girl like Aaliyah into a threat without a shred of evidence. As Karen filled out the paperwork at the precinct, her face a mask of cold efficiency, she didn't see the trembling girl in the holding cell. She saw a potential criminal, a box to be checked, a problem to be controlled. But Karen's actions that night had ripple effects she couldn't yet fathom. Malik's mission relied on absolute secrecy. Any hint of his true identity could unravel 3 years of grueling work. If Victor Kane learned that Malik's daughter had been brought into a precinct, he might start asking questions that could lead to Malik's cover being blown. The stakes were higher than Karen could imagine. Lives hung in the balance, not just Malik's, but those of countless victims trapped in Cain's web. Aaliyah, sitting silently in that holding cell, was more than a girl wronged by prejudice. She was a potential spark that could ignite a firestorm. For Aaliyah, the pain wasn't just in the loss of her braids or the humiliation of being cuffed in the rain. It was the betrayal of a system she'd been taught to trust, a system her father risked his life to uphold. She thought of the kids at school who whispered about unfair treatment, the stories she'd brushed off as exaggeration. Now, those stories felt all too real, their weight pressing down on her as she stared at the smeared ink of her concert program. But even in that moment of despair, a flicker of defiance burned within her. She wouldn't let this define her. She wouldn't let Karen steal her light. Meanwhile, Karen sat at her desk, oblivious to the storm she'd set in motion. The image of Aaliyah's steady gaze lingered in her mind, unsettling her in a way she couldn't quite place. For the first time in years, a crack appeared in the armor of her convictions, a crack that would soon widen into a chasm of regret. The precinct doors slammed open with a force that echoed through the sterile halls, a storm of fury and fear embodied in one man's determined stride. Inside the holding cell, Aaliyah Brooks sat on a cold metal bench, her lavender dress still damp from the rain, clinging uncomfortably to her skin. The harsh fluorescent lights above buzzed relentlessly, casting stark shadows on the concrete floor where her crumpled concert program lay, its ink smeared beyond recognition. At 16, Aaliyah had never felt so small, so stripped of dignity. The intricate braids her father, Malik, had woven with such care that morning were gone, cut away by a barber under Officer Karen Steele's orders, each snip a wound to her pride. Yet, even as the ache of humiliation pulsed in her chest, Aaliyah refused to break. She sat with her back straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the wall ahead. "I'm a Brooks," she whispered to herself, her father's words a lifeline in the suffocating stillness. "I shine." Outside, Officer Karen Steele stood at her desk, her movements mechanical as she filled out the detention paperwork. Her face was a mask of indifference, but beneath the surface, a flicker of unease stirred. Aaliyah's unwavering gaze in the holding cell had unsettled her, a quiet defiance that didn't match the troublemaker profile Karen had so quickly assigned. Still, she pushed the feeling aside, chalking it up to exhaustion from her double shift. "Protocol is protocol," she muttered to a younger officer nearby, her voice clipped. "If we let these kids slide, who knows what they're mixed up in?" The officer, a rookie named Daniels, hesitated, his brow furrowing as he glanced toward the holding cell. "She's just a kid, Karen. A violinist. Doesn't seem like—" Karen cut him off with a sharp glare. "You'll learn, Daniels. Instincts don't lie." But Karen's instincts were about to be put to a test she never saw coming. The precinct doors burst open, and Captain Marcus Hayes strode in, his presence commanding the room like a thunderclap. At 50, Hayes was a seasoned leader, his sharp eyes scanning the precinct with an intensity that made every officer snap to attention. His gaze landed on Karen, and the air grew heavy with unspoken tension. "Steele," he barked, his deep voice slicing through the hum of the precinct. "Who'd you bring in?" Karen straightened, her composure unshaken at least on the outside. "A girl," she replied coolly, flipping through the file on her desk. "Aaliyah Brooks. Caught her walking late in Midtown. Her hairstyle looked gang-related, and she was uncooperative. I followed protocol." The name Aaliyah Brooks hit Hayes like a freight train. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening as he leaned over Karen's desk, his hands planted firmly on the surface. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Aaliyah Brooks," Karen repeated, a flicker of uncertainty creeping into her tone as she registered the shift in Hayes' demeanor. "She's a student, but—" Hayes exhaled sharply, his anger giving way to a deep, weary disappointment. He pulled out his phone, his fingers moving with precision as he dialed a number. "Malik, you need to get here now," he said curtly before hanging up. Turning back to Karen, his tone was ice cold. "Do you have any idea what you've done, Steele? Aaliyah Brooks isn't just any girl. She's the daughter of Malik Brooks, an FBI agent working one of the most dangerous undercover missions in this city." Karen froze, her breath catching in her throat. "An FBI agent?" she stammered, the weight of Hayes's words crashing down on her like a tidal wave. That's right, Hayes snapped, his voice rising. For 3 years, Malik has been infiltrating Victor Kane's network cone of the most ruthless crime syndicates in Detroit. Drugs, arms, trafficking. He's been risking his life to bring them down. Every move he makes is calculated, every connection a potential threat. And you just gave Kane a reason to suspect him. You cut an innocent girl's hair based on your ignorant assumptions, and now you've put an entire operation in Malik's family in jeopardy. Karen's mind spun, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of her desk. I was just following protocol, she stammered, but the excuse sounded hollow even to her own ears. Hayes's words echoed in her mind. An entire operation in jeopardy. She hadn't just humiliated a girl, she'd potentially endangered lives, countless lives, all because of her snap judgment. Moments later, the precinct doors swung open again, and Malik Brooks entered, his dark suit pristine but his eyes burning with a fury that made the air crackle. He strode straight to the holding cell, his heart lurching at the sight of Aaliyah. Her dress was soaked, her hair unevenly cropped, but her eyes, those fierce, unyielding eyes, slid up with a faint spark of relief at the sight of him. "Dad," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tremor of exhaustion. Malik crouched down, his hand gently cupping her cheek, his expression a storm of love and rage. "I'm here, baby girl," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll make this right." He stood, turning to face Karen, his gaze piercing through her like a blade. "Officer Steele," he said, his tone low and menacing, "do you understand the consequences of what you've done?" Karen opened her mouth to respond, but the intensity of Malik's stare silenced her. "I've spent 3 years building trust with Kane's crew," he continued, each word a dagger. "And because of your prejudice, he might start digging. If I go down, if my daughter gets hurt, it's on you." Karen felt her legs weaken, the gravity of her actions sinking in. Hayes stepped forward, his voice firm. "Steele, you're suspended, effective immediately. We'll deal with this later." As Karen sank into a chair, her hands trembling, Aaliyah watched from the holding cell, her father's presence, a shield against the pain. She didn't know the full scope of the danger her father faced, but she knew one thing. She wouldn't let this break her. She'd shine, just like he'd always told her she would. In the dim glow of a Detroit dive bar, a disgraced cop prepared to risk everything to right a wrong, while a young girl turned her pain into a melody that refused to be silenced. Aaliyah Brooks sat at the upright piano in her family's modest living room, the soft morning light filtering through the curtains and casting a warm glow on the wooden floor. At 16, she'd always found refuge in music, but now, after the humiliation at the precinct, that refuge felt more vital than ever. Her unevenly cropped hair once, a cascade of intricate braids woven by her father, Malik was a constant reminder of Officer Karen Steele's cruelty. Each time Aaliyah caught her reflection in the small mirror above the piano, a pang of loss twisted in her chest, but she refused to let that pain define her. Her fingers hovered over the keys, hesitant at first, then began to play. The notes started low and mournful, echoing the ache of betrayal she felt after that rainy night. Yet, as the melody unfolded, brighter tones wove their way in, notes of resilience, of hope, of defiance. She called the piece Unbroken, a title that felt like a promise to herself. Playing gave Aaliyah a voice when words failed her. She thought of the way Karen had looked at her, the cold suspicion in her eyes, the way the handcuffs had bitten into her wrists. The memory brought a lump to her throat, but as the music swelled, so did her resolve. "They can take my braids, but they can't take my light," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened to fall. This piece wasn't just a song, it was her story, her way of reclaiming the dignity Karen had tried to strip away. Aaliyah glanced at the blank sheet music on the stand, resolving to write down every note, to make Unbroken a testament to her strength. From the doorway, Malik watched silently, his heart swelling with pride and sorrow. His little girl was healing, but the danger he faced loomed larger than ever, and he knew the events of that night had set a perilous chain in motion. Across town, in a gritty bar on Detroit's west side, Karen Steele stood at a crossroads of her own. The suspension from the force had left her reeling, but Captain Hayes' words and Malik's furious gazad carved a deep wound of guilt into her conscience. She'd been wrong, horribly wrong, and the consequences of her actions threatened not just Aaliyah, but an entire FBI operation. Malik had summoned her to the precinct the day before, his voice cold but laced with a flicker of hope. "You have a chance to make this right, Steele," he'd said, sliding a file across the table. "But it won't be easy." The file contained photos of Victor Kane's right-hand man, Darius Hawk Cartera Man, known for his ruthless efficiency and uncanny ability to spot a lie. Malik's plan was clear. Karen would go undercover, posing as a disillusioned cop to gain Hawk's trust and protect Malik's mission. Karen adjusted the worn leather jacket she'd chosen for the role, her hair tied back in a messy bun to complete the look of a cop fed up with the system. Her palms were sweaty as she stepped into the bar, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the low hum of conversation. All eyes turned to her, sizing her up, but she forced herself to walk confidently to the counter and order a whiskey. She knew Hawk was watching from a corner booth, his sharp gaze dissecting her every move. "Being a cop doesn't pay much, does it?" she said loudly enough for him to hear, her tone bitter. "Too many rules, too little reward. I'm ready to make some real money." Hawk's head tilted slightly, his cold smile sending a chill down Karen's spine. "You think I trust just anyone who walks in here?" he asked, his voice low and menacing. Karen met his gaze, her heart pounding, but her expression steady. "I don't need your trust," she replied firmly. "I need a chance to prove myself." The tension in the air was palpable as Hawk studied her, his eyes searching for any hint of deception. After a long, agonizing pause, he nodded. "All right, but if you're playing me, you'll regret it." Karen exhaled slowly, the weight of the task ahead pressing down on her. She thought of Aaliyah's steady gaze in the holding cell, the way the girl had held her head high, despite the humiliation. That image haunted Karen, a reminder of the harm she'd caused and the strength she'd underestimated. For the first time in years, Karen felt a flicker of purpose beyond the badge. This mission wasn't just about saving Malik's operation. It was about proving she could be more than the person who'd wronged an innocent girl. Back at home, Aaliyah played the final notes of Unbroken, her fingers lingering on the keys as the melody faded. She looked up at her father, a small smile breaking through the sadness in her eyes. "I'm okay, Dad," she said softly. "I'm stronger than they think." Malik nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He knew the road ahead was fraught with danger for him, for Karen, for the mission, but seeing Alia's resilience gave him hope. As he prepared to face the next phase of his undercover work, he held on to that hope, knowing that his daughter's light would guide him through the darkness. The air in Detroit's abandoned warehouse district crackled with tension, as the faint glow of a single street lamp illuminated a scene where redemption and danger collided in a heartbeat. Karen Steele's pulse raced as she stood outside the rusted gates of an old warehouse on Detroit's west side, the night air thick with the scent of oil and decay. The leather jacket she'd worn to blend in now felt like a flimsy shield against the danger that awaited her. For weeks, she'd played her role as a disgraced cop, gaining the trust of Darius Hawk Carter, Victor Kane's ruthless right-hand man. Every forced laugh, every calculated word had led to this high-stakes raid orchestrated by Malik Brooks and his FBI team to dismantle Kane's criminal empire. Karen's mission was clear: distract Hawk long enough for the team to move in. But as she adjusted the hidden earpiece in her ear, the weight of her past mistakes pressed down on her. She thought of Aaliyah Brooks, the 16-year-old girl, whose dignity she'd stolen with a snap judgment, and the guilt fueled her resolve. "I owe her this," Karen whispered to herself, her voice trembling but determined. Inside the warehouse, Malik Brooks moved silently with his team, his face a mask of focus as he signaled for them to take their positions. At 42, he'd spent 3 years undercover, earning Kane's trust while gathering evidence of his crimes, drugs, arms, trafficking. Tonight was the culmination of that work, but the stakes had never felt higher. The image of Aaliyah in that holding cell, her lavender dress soaked and her braids gone, flashed through his mind, igniting a fierce determination. He couldn't fail, not for his daughter, not for the countless lives Kane had destroyed. "Steele, you're up," he whispered into his comms, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. Karen took a deep breath and stepped into the warehouse, her boots echoing on the concrete floor. Hawk stood near a stack of crates, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows as he barked orders to Kane's men. "Hawk!" "We've got a problem," Karen called out, her tone urgent but controlled. "I just got word someone tipped off the feds. We need to move the shipment now." Hawk's gaze snapped to her, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun at his hip. "You better not be playing me, Steele," he growled, his voice low and menacing. Karen held his stare, her heart pounding but her expression unwavering. "I'm here to play games," she said firmly. "I'm here to save our asses." For a moment, the warehouse was silent, the tension so thick it felt like a physical weight. Then Hawk nodded, barking orders to his men to load the trucks. Karen exhaled silently, her distraction working as planned. Outside, Malik and his team moved in, their footsteps silent but swift as they breached the perimeter. The raid unfolded with precision agents swarmed the warehouse, shouting commands as Kane's men scrambled for their weapons. Gunfire erupted, the sharp cracks echoing off the metal walls as chaos consumed the space. Karen stayed close to Hawk, her role as his ally keeping her in the line of fire. But as the FBI closed in, Hawk's suspicion flared. "You set me up," he roared, turning his gun on Karen. Before she could react, a shot rang out not from Hawk, but from Malik, who'd spotted the danger from across the warehouse. Hawk stumbled, clutching his shoulder, but another of Kane's men fired back, the bullet aimed at Malik. Without thinking, Karen lunged forward, shoving Malik out of the way. The bullet tore through her side, and she crumpled to the ground, pain exploding through her body as her vision blurred. Malik dropped to his knees beside her, his hands pressing against her wound as he shouted for a medic. "Stay with me, Steele," he urged, his voice tight with urgency. Karen's breaths came in shallow gasps, but she managed a faint smile. "Tell Alia, I'm sorry," she whispered, her eyes glistening with tears of regret and relief. Malik nodded, his throat tight as he watched the medics rush in. By the time the dust settled, Victor Kane and Hawk were in cuffs, their empire crumbling under the weight of the FBI's evidence. The raid was a success, saving countless lives from the horrors of Kane's operations. But for Malik, the victory was bittersweet. As he sat in the back of an ambulance, watching the medics stabilize Karen, he thought of Aliyahoff, the pain she'd endured, and the strength she'd shown. He knew she'd want to know about this, about the woman who'd wronged her but risked everything to make it right. Miles away, Aaliyah sat at her piano, her fingers tracing the final notes of Unbroken. She didn't know the details of the raid, but a quiet unease settled in her chest, a feeling that something big had happened. When her phone buzzed with a call from her father, her heart skipped a beat. "Dad?" she answered, her voice trembling with hope and fear. Malik's voice came through, steady but heavy with emotion. "We got him, baby girl. It's over." Aaliyah exhaled, relief flooding through her, but the weight in her father's tone told her there was more to the story, a story of sacrifice, redemption, and the cost of justice. In the sterile quiet of a Detroit hospital room, a moment of grace unfolded, weaving together two lives once torn apart by prejudice and pain. Karen Steele lay in a hospital bed at Henry Ford Hospital, the steady beep of the heart monitor a quiet reminder of how close she'd come to losing everything. The bullet that had torn through her side during the warehouse raid had been removed, but the pain lingered, a dull ache that paled in comparison to the weight of her guilt. At 38, Karen had spent years on the force, her worldview shaped by a lens of suspicion and bias. But now, as she stared at the ceiling, her mind kept drifting back to Aaliyah Brooks, the 16-year-old girl whose life she'd upended with a single, reckless act. The memory of Aaliyah's steady gaze in that holding cell, her quiet dignity despite the humiliation, haunted Karen. She'd been wrong, horribly wrong, and the raid had been her desperate attempt to make amends. But as she lay there, her side bandaged, and her future uncertain, she wondered if it would ever be enough. The door to her room creaked open, and Karen's breath caught as Malik Brooks stepped inside, his presence filling the space with a quiet intensity. Behind him stood Aaliyah, her cropped hair now styled into a neat bob, a soft purple scarf draped over her shoulders. The sight of the girl sent a jolt through Karina, mix of shame and awe. Aaliyah's eyes held the same strength Karen remembered, but there was something softer there now, a flicker of something that looked like understanding. Malik's expression was harder to read, a storm of emotions simmering beneath the surface, as he stood protectively by his daughter's side. "Steele," he said, his voice low but steady. "We need to talk." Karen swallowed hard, her hands gripping the thin hospital blanket. "Mr. Brooks, two don't even know where to start," she began, her voice trembling. "What I did to Aaliyah, it was wrong. I let my biases take over, and I hurt an innocent girl. I hurt your family. I'll never forgive myself for that." Her eyes darted to Aaliyah, and the words tumbled out, raw and unfiltered. "I'm so sorry, Aaliyah, you didn't deserve any of it." Aaliyah stepped forward, her gaze unwavering as she took in Karen's pale face and the regret etched into every line. She thought of that rainy night, the cold handcuffs, the snip of the scissors, the way her father's gift had been reduced to a symbol of suspicion. The pain still lingered, a quiet ache in her chest. But as she looked at Karen, she saw something else. A woman who'd risked her life to save her father, a woman who was trying to change. "I was angry at you," Aaliyah said softly, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "What you did hurt me more than you'll ever know. But I heard about what you did for my dad. You saved his life, and that means something." She paused, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I forgive you, Miss Steele, not because it doesn't hurt, but because I believe people can change." Karen's breath hitched, tears spilling down her cheeks as Aaliyah's words washed over her. Forgiveness felt like a lifeline, a gift she didn't deserve but desperately needed. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for, Aaliyah. You've taught me more than I can say." Malik placed a hand on Aaliyah's shoulder, his expression softening as he looked at Karen. "You put my mission at risk, Steele," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "But you also helped bring Kane down. You've got a long road ahead, but this," he gestured to Aaliyah, "this is a start." Over the next few days, as Karen recovered, she took Malik's words to heart. She wrote a letter to Aaliyah, pouring out her remorse and her resolve to change. When she was discharged, she made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. She resigned from the police force. "I can't go back to that life," she told her sister over the phone, her voice steady for the first time in weeks. "I need to do something better, something that helps, not hurts." She took a job at a community center in Detroit's East Side, working with at-risk teens, determined to support the kids she'd once misjudged. Meanwhile, Aaliyah continued her own healing through music. At home, she sat at her piano, her fingers dancing across the keys as she refined Unbroken. The melody had evolved, weaving in threads of forgiveness alongside the notes of resilience. She thought of Karen's tearful apology, the way her father had looked at her with pride, and a quiet peace settled in her heart. Aaliyah knew the road to healing wasn't over, not for her, not for Karen, but she also knew they were both moving forward. As she played the final notes of her song, she smiled softly, feeling the weight of that rainy night lift just a little. She was a Brooks, and she would always shine. Under the bright lights of a Detroit community center, two unlikely allies turned their shared pain into a beacon of hope, proving that even the deepest wounds could inspire lasting change. Aaliyah Brooks stood in the small music room of the East Side Community Center, a modest brick building nestled in the heart of Detroit. At 16, she'd always dreamed of using her violin to lift others up. But now, as she tuned her instrument in front of a group of wide-eyed kids, that dream felt more real than ever. The room was filled with the chatter of young voices, some shy, others brimming with curiosity, as they waited for their first violin lesson. Aaliyah's cropped hair, now styled with a few colorful beads woven into the ends, caught the light, a reminder of the pain she'd endured, but also a symbol of her resilience. She smiled at the kids, her heart swelling with a quiet joy. "Music can tell your story," she told them, her voice warm and steady. "It helped me through some hard times, and I know it can help you too." Across the hall, Karen Steele sat in a circle with a group of teens, her notebook open as she listened to their stories of struggle and hope. At 38, Karen had left the police force behind, trading her badge for a new purpose at the community center. Her side still ached from the bullet wound she'd sustained during the raid that brought down Victor Kane, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional weight she'd carried since that rainy night she'd wronged Aaliyah. Working with these kids, many of whom reminded her of the girl she'd misjudged, felt like a second chance, a way to rebuild what she'd broken. She shared her story with them, her voice soft but honest. "I made a mistake once," she said, her eyes glistening with the memory. I hurt someone because I didn't see her for who she really was. But I'm here now to listen, to help, because I believe in all of you. The collaboration between Aaliyah and Karen had started slowly, born out of a shared desire to turn their pain into something meaningful. Aaliyah taught music, pouring her heart into every lesson, while Karen offered emotional support, helping the teens navigate challenges she'd once been too quick to judge. Together, they created a safe space where kids could dream, heal, and grow. Their work caught the attention of a local filmmaker who produced a documentary titled Strings of Resilience, chronicling their journey from conflict to partnership. The film aired on a local station, its message of forgiveness and redemption resonating far beyond Detroit's borders. Viewers were moved by Aaliyah's quiet strength and Karen's transformation, leaving comments online like, "This is what healing looks like," and "They're changing lives, one note at a time." Months later, Aaliyah stood on the stage of the Fox Theater, one of Detroit's grandest venues, her violin resting gently against her shoulder. The audience buzzed with anticipation as she prepared to perform Unbroken, the piece she'd started composing after that fateful night. The melody had evolved over time, weaving together threads of pain, resilience, and forgiveness, a reflection of her journey with Karen. As the first notes filled the air, Aaliyah closed her eyes, letting the music speak for her. The mournful tones of betrayal gave way to soaring notes of hope, each stroke of her bow a testament to her strength. In the back row, Karen sat quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, tears streaming down her face as the music washed over her. She thought of the girl she'd once wronged, now a beacon of light on that stage, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. Aaliyah's music wasn't just healing herself, it was healing everyone who heard it, including Karen. For Aaliyah, the performance was a milestone, a moment to celebrate how far she'd come. She thought of her father, Malik, who sat in the front row, his eyes shining with pride. She thought of the kids at the community center, whose laughter and dreams had become her inspiration. And she thought of Karen, the woman who'd hurt her but had also helped her heal. As the final note lingered in the air, the audience erupted into applause, their cheers a wave of love that wrapped around Aaliyah like a warm embrace. She bowed, her heart full, knowing that her story and Karen's had become a catalyst for change. Karen watched from the shadows, her heart swelling with a mix of awe and humility. She knew their work at the community center was just the beginning, a ripple that could grow into a wave of transformation. Together, they'd turn their pain into purpose, proving that even the darkest moments could lead to light. As she clapped along with the crowd, Karen felt a quiet peace settle over her, a peace she hadn't known she could find. As the final notes of Unbroken faded into the stillness of the Fox Theater, a powerful truth lingered in the air. Even the darkest moments can give birth to the brightest change. Aaliyah Brooks stood on that grand stage, her violin resting gently at her side, the roar of applause washing over her like a wave of healing light. At 16, she'd walked a path few could imagine, from the humiliation of a rainy night in Detroit, where her braids and her dignity were stripped away, to this moment of triumph, where her music became a bridge to hope. Looking out at the audience, Aaliyah saw her father Malik in the front row, his eyes glistening with pride. She saw the faces of strangers, many of whom had seen her story in Strings of Resilience, their expressions a mix of awe and inspiration. And in the back, she knew Karen Steele was there, a quiet presence whose journey had intertwined with hers in ways neither could have predicted. Aaliyah's heart swelled with a quiet peace. This isn't just my story, she thought, her voice soft in her mind. It's a story of what we can become when we choose to rise above the pain. Karen Steele, sitting in the shadows of the back row, felt the weight of Aaliyah's music settle deep into her soul. At 38, she'd spent years as a cop, her worldview clouded by prejudice, until one reckless act forced her to confront the harm she'd caused. Hurting Aaliyah had been her greatest regret, but it had also been her turning point. From the hospital bed where she'd whispered her apology, to the community center where she now worked, Karen had rebuilt her purpose, one step at a time. Watching Aaliyah on stage, Karen saw a reflection of her own redemption. I was the one who dimmed her light, she thought, her chest tight with emotion. But she showed me how to find my own. Their shared work at the Eastside Community Center had become a lifeline, not just for the kids they helped, but for Karen herself. It was proof that change was possible, that even the deepest mistakes could lead to meaningful growth. Together, Aaliyah and Karen had turned their pain into a legacy of resilience and redemption. Aaliyah's music, once a personal refuge, now inspired countless others, from the kids she taught to the audiences who heard Unbroken. Karen's work at the community center gave teens a safe space to dream, a stark contrast to the suspicion she'd once wielded. Their story, captured in the documentary, had sparked conversations across Detroit and beyond, reminding people of the power of forgiveness and the strength it takes to change. From two sides of a painful divide, they'd built a bridge, a testament to what can happen when we choose understanding over judgment, healing over hate. The lesson of their journey was clear. Adversity doesn't define us, but our response to it does. Aaliyah's resilience showed that we can rise above injustice, turning our pain into a force for good. Karen's transformation proved that it's never too late to confront our mistakes and make amends. Together, they demonstrated that forgiveness isn't a sign of weakness, but a profound act of strength that can heal not just individuals, but entire communities. Their story was a call to action, urging everyone to look beyond stereotypes, to listen, to grow, and to believe in the possibility of change. So, what does it take to turn a wound into a legacy? Aaliyah and Karen's story reminds us that the greatest value lies in our capacity to grow from our pain, from our mistakes, and from the courage to forgive. It's a journey that tugs at the heart, showing us that even in our darkest moments, there's a light waiting to shine through. Let their story inspire you to reflect on your own path. What can you rise above, and who can you lift up along the way? If this tale of resilience and redemption touched you, hit that like button, drop a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more stories that will move you, inspire you, and remind you of the incredible power within us all. Let's keep this journey going together,